everyone, and welcome to our third session of the ESG Tech Talk series. It's great to have you here again. Today we will be covering the topic that is particularly close to me, because I previously worked as an auditor of non-financial indicators. And our theme for today is ESG starts with data, ensuring quality, auditability, and trust. My name is Wojciech Pastyrczyk. I'm an ESG expert at Clouds on Mars, and I'm joined today by Wiktor Dobrowolski, ESG Data Architect. Wiktor, could you say a few words about yourself and explain to our listeners what an ESG data architecture actually does?
Yeah, but just a few words, as I promised. So indeed, I've been a data architect for some time, and being a data architect means that simply I design some data and reporting ecosystems. I've been specializing in ESG data and reporting ecosystems for almost 4 years now, working for various customers, clients across industries, where we usually establish such a usually corporate reporting data platform from scratch or redesigning an existing one. And yeah, that's more or less what we do, what I do.
Yeah, that's great. I'm really happy to have you here. Before we start, a quick reminder of our session and how we actually work. Our sessions are really, really open-minded, and we are really focusing on just talking. So please type your questions in any time in the chat. We will answer all of that questions after in the Q&A session at the end. All right, so I think that we can jump into our discussion. And I have first question to you, Wiktor. You often say that ESG data is nothing special. I know what you mean, actually, but I'm really curious, and I want to, if you could explain it to our listeners as well.
Yes, it's a serious statement, but of course it's intended to be a bit provocative. And that's the statement which I usually use to simply launch any discussion with a new client, for example. And they sometimes agree, sometimes they don't. But why I think ESG data is nothing special? First of all, ESG data is just data. So everything what is related with data management, data governance, like data owners, data managers, data engineering, like establishing some data pipelines which move data from one place to another, data architecture, data quality assurance, so ensuring that data is complete, accurate, etc. All the keywords simply work more or less the same for the ESG data as they do for any other data which you've been having in your organization for years, decades, or even longer. That's first piece. Contrary to appearances generally, ESG data consists of, let's say, two parts. So the first part is indeed some new information, ESG specific, like, for example, some emission factors, like emission factors, product carbon footprint factors. So some kind of, let's say, modeled factors which really determine a footprint of something, of some activity, or some material, some product, etc. So that's the new part of the information, whereas the other part, the second part, is actually the data which you've been having in your organization from the very beginning. So production volumes, sales volumes, all process orders, all that kind of stuff. So two pieces, and of course, then we combine one with the other, and we create the final ESG measures, metrics, and it's generally new. Yeah, but composed from a new piece and the existing piece. That's the second thought. Whereas actually what is special about ESG data is, let's say, determined by the ESG itself. So ESG as a, let's say, a reporting framework, mindset is, first of all, it's pretty novel because it's been still established, let's say. It's not extremely mature compared to other aspects. And the second point is pretty interdisciplinary. So it really connects so many dots. And it actually determines that ESG data is also pretty interdisciplinary. So when you work with ESG data, you really need to get the data from so many different places, so many different systems inside your organization, outside your organization, owned by very different organization or people. So the data is extremely fragmented, and you really need to do huge work to collect it in one place and really create the ESG data at the end of the day. But technically speaking, nothing special. So that's what I mean. And actually, yes, but that's it.
Yeah, I also see your point of view that there's nothing inherently special about ESG data, and sometimes it really is only the name that makes it seem different. So in many cases, we simply gather data that already exists in the company's data infrastructure in the organization, and then we actually put this ESG stamp on it. You also saying sometimes in our conversation with the client and with each other that ESG starts with data. Isn't ESG primarily about regulations and reporting? What's your point of view on that as an ESG data engineer?
Well, that's a big point. So how much time we have? No, I will try to make it short. Of course, I'm not a philosopher. I'm a data architect. But actually, the thing is that regulations, reporting, it's the, let's say, consequence, not the purpose. The purpose is just to make the world a better place. And then, of course, we need to bring some regulations to, let's say, just to make organizations indeed going into the purpose, and simply some kind of reporting also must be established so that organization, external stakeholders know where we are, either per organization or as the whole. Yes, so that's the first point. And actually, the purpose goes in pair with, I would say, maybe not like this. So generally sustainability and ESG is about some kind of efficiency, differently understood depending on the aspect, whether you're environmental, social, or governance. But on the example of environmental, please take a look. If you emit greenhouse gases, you simply waste energy. If you generate waste, you waste resources instead of reusing them or recycle them. If you overuse water, you overuse land, it's all inefficiency. In the environmental aspect, it's usually operational inefficiency. So simply sustainability and ESG is about making your organization more efficient. At the end of the day, it should go hand in hand with also, efficient in terms of costs. But of course, the transformation really requires time. But anyway, it's about efficiency management. And simply to manage efficiency, you need to be able to measure it. And to measure it, you need to have data, which we call ESG data. So long story short, everything starts with data and ends with, let's say, some decisions made by some stakeholders inside your organization, outside your organization, like investor, etc., based on the ESG data, which you communicate via reporting. And that's more or less what I mean by that, and why we start with data. Simply because we want to measure and manage something, what we want to communicate through reporting. Not going too much into philosophy yet. That would be it.
Yeah, that's quite interesting point of view. For example, from my perspective as an ESG expert, I'm often more focused on regulations and standards, and many companies, especially what I see in our market in Poland, first see regulations like CSRD. I know that there is a lot of going on with CSRD right now, with ESRS, but they immediately focus on compliance. And when, for example, there is no data in the company, they first of all see some kind of regulatory alignment that they have to align with regulations, and start thinking about the process of how to gather the data, how to actually handle all of the regulatory with particular standards. And I see some regulations, and sometimes it's starting with regulations, as some kind of trigger to organizations to think about the data. But I understand your point of view that from the perspective of data engineer, the data becomes quite crucial, and it starts with data, because actually then we can build a strong foundations and actually be compliant with regulations. All right. I also want to go into one case that I see that is very parallel, is financial data and non-financial data, and how is data work from the perspective of data engineer any different from work with financial data? What's your opinion on that?
Mm-hmm. So first thought, just to set the stage maybe, or a side note, is that generally ESG data and reporting, especially ESG reporting, is very often owned and managed by either finance department or finance people or ex-finance people, especially in big organizations like in our clients. I guess 100% is the owner of the entire corporate ESG data and reporting, let's say, is some financial guy. That's good. Finance or the financial world is also a natural point of reference for business processes and data in ESG. That's another point. But actually, where's the difference? From the data architecture point of view, there will be many differences, but one really key difference, which we are working on also in very many cases, is the difference in, let's say, the accounting paradigm. So financial accounting, let's say oversimplifying, because I'm not a subject matter expert here, but just oversimplifying, just to give you some feeling, is that in financial accounting, well, generally, if there are any changes to some past period, which you've already reported, even disclosed externally, due to some reasons, you simply account the changes, the balance, the difference into ongoing open periods. So what has been reported is simply locked, frozen, you do not touch it, apart from some exceptional cases. Whereas in the ESG, theoretically, it works similarly, but in practice, not. In ESG, when you get some new information, and please trust me, in ESG, considering generally my everyday work is really working with ESG data across E, S, G, all kinds of data, and I'm touching very raw data, very detailed data, and I'm simply aware how much it changes every day. Like today, probably we'll get few new product carbon footprint factors for some materials purchased from some suppliers, which are applicable retrospectively to 2 years back, because they have learned that actually they have a better methodology nowadays, so they give us better data, and we should, let's say, reflect it into past periods, although we've already reported. But the thing is that ESG data and changes to ESG data, smaller corrections or some bigger restatements due to, for example, invoice correction of your electricity provider due to some methodology change or how you calculate recyclability, reusability, all that kind of stuff. But trust me, thousands of changes almost every week, let's say, and you actually account the changes into the periods which they are related to. Yeah. So if I'm getting a correction invoice into some electricity related invoice 2 years back, actually it's applicable 2 years back. I'm not accounting it into the ongoing period like December. I must account it to the period 2 years back. And that's the biggest difference, because it determines that actually in ESG, data architecture wise, you need to manage, let's say, 2 states of data. The first state is accurate data, like we call it. So it's the most accurate, most up-to-date state of your data. So if you get a new information applicable even to 10 years back, you just apply it, yeah, just to see the most accurate view of your ESG world, considering the most accurate, most up-to-date data. That's the accurate world. That's very usable for some operational use cases like R&D, product composition, running a manufacturing plant, etc. the guys there are interested in the most factful data. They don't care whether it's significant enough from the corporate point of view, but that's the accurate data. And on the other hand, you need to manage official data. And official data is accurate data, but considering some corrections and restatements policy, if an organization does have one. And then simply organization determines in what cases, if they learn some change to the past, to some periods which they have already reported and disclosed, they consider such a change as applicable and they restate the past data. So simply that's the official data, and you need to manage both to simply be able also to check whether comparing the official with accurate, you are meeting some thresholds which make you to simply restate your data. Like, for example, your greenhouse gas emissions scope 1, due to some emission factor changes collected throughout some years, the change versus what you reported 5 years ago is nowadays, for example, 6% up or down. And then you, depending on your policy, decide to restate, and simply within the next report, you inform the stakeholders that actually there is a change to some past data. And also for your internal reporting, top management, etc., you will use the restated value. But simply corrections and restatements is a keyword here. So you actually need to have a proper policy in place determining in what cases you will be restating, like accepting a change, in what cases you will be rejecting a change, in what cases you will be thinking whether to accept or reject. Later, you need to design your data and reporting ecosystem in such a way that it's restatement aware, so that you can very easily manage any changes in the data to accept or pre-reject them, and always be able to see the most accurate version of reality and the official version. The most accurate is about accuracy. The most official is about stability, because no organization wants to restate their greenhouse gas emissions scope 1 every year, even if it changes by, let's say, 0.5%. They want to keep the data stable and wait for really meaningful, really material changes to happen. But corrections and restatements, they are handled, then reported internally and disclosed externally. Here's the biggest difference in terms of financial data and ESG data. Long story short, but it's really complicated, one of the most complicated topics. And I'm not sure whether regulations are mature enough in this topic, but I would ask you then.
I imagine it isn't, and I imagine also that it is not something that you can manage in your Excel. You with your client manage it in very complex solutions based on Power BI, based on Power Apps, I suppose. How does it look like?
You mean once again, Wojciech?
I was wondering, how does it look like when it comes to managing the restatement? It cannot be done in the Excel file, I suppose. It is some kind of really complex architecture within some modules of Power BIs, of even Fabric, even Databricks. And this is also the role of data architect, also to somehow manage it from the perspective of technology, I suppose.
So I would prefer not to dive deeper here, because it's extremely complicated topic. We have some kind of a corrections and restatement framework which we come to a client with and simply incorporate. But generally there's a policy, then your data architecture, data models, data pipelines must be aware of what rules to apply if they recognize the change. And then you also need some kind of an application to manage the cases where there is a potential restatement, so a stakeholder can make a decision and sign off. We restate or we do not restate if it's not obvious case. Obvious cases are handled pretty automatically, but it's a very big topic, so you would need to extend by 2 hours. I'm not sure whether you have 2 hours and our guests have.
Actually, it's also this topic is connected to the other question that I have to you, is where actually auditability truly starts in practice. What's your point of view on that?
Well, so I'm a data architect, so let's say from data architecture point of view, well, we see it this way. So there is an organization like a company, let's say a CPG manufacturer, and the organization does have its boundaries. And within boundaries, they have their systems, all kinds of systems like ERP systems, CRM systems, transportation, warehousing, all kinds of systems, application, etc. And some of the systems play a role of so-called system of record. So that's a place in your organization where information, any kind of information, like utility consumption, like greenhouse gas emission factor, global warming potential factor, water use, anything is recorded, so entered into your systems for the very first time, and later it's simply processed further downstream by other systems, other data platforms, etc. But systems of records are the place where information is recorded. It's either entered manually or it flows from another system inside your organization or outside your organization, more precisely. But generally, that's a key place, because with every information you input into such a system, you must usually attach also some kind of an evidence. Yeah, like you input renewable electricity consumption for December in, let's say, plant in Krakow. You simply attach also an invoice from one of the electricity providers, which proves that the number you input is correct. That's the beginning. Then, of course, it could happen that what you inputted is incorrect or it changes over time. So you must update the information, reattach a new evidence, and everything must be recorded. We call it revision management, let's say. So there's an audit trail so that you could always check electricity consumption in the Krakow plant and check what kind of values were inputted, when, by who, and if changed, why. Yeah, so if I'm changing, I'm just inputting, well, there's a correction from the provider. Yeah, so generally recording information with all the evidence and revision management, so there's an audit trail, is the first step. So where auditability starts, but it's even more interesting because actually the true auditability is not only having all the evidence in the system of record, and later you don't have transparency, later you have some black box, and later you have some reports and disclosures, because you must know what is happening in the black box as well. So actually when we design data and reporting ecosystems, we take care not only about proper full auditability in systems of records, but also end-to-end auditability and traceability. So we perform so-called data historization in every stage of data journey, like you take your data from systems of record, then you put it into some other systems, combine it, transform it, aggregate it, put some data platforms, and it flows through your organization, through your systems. And in every stage of data processing, you have so-called data historization, which simply records any changes to your data. So that at the end of the day, if you pick any, let's say, number, for example, from an external disclosure or some internal report, like greenhouse gas emission scope 2 this time in region Europe, let's say the previous fiscal year, you can actually trace back how the data has been created, how the number was created, considering each and every processing stage. And actually, you can also time travel, like if there was a restatement, nowadays it's 2 million, it used to be 1,900,000, you can travel back at every stage to the previous value and also see the current value. And that's the full auditability end-to-end then, so that you really have full control over your data, and auditor is able to track the entire flow end-to-end, travel back in time, knows everything, including what, when, who, and why. And that's the general idea, which is really worth being considered and implemented, because it's not about audits, but of course it shortens the preparation to an audit by 1000%, of course, because it's much less manual work, but also, creates trust to your data at every stage. So that's my point of view on the auditability.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I fully agree with what you said, that it's not only about checking the data, but also about all the process that follow this. And I think that it is quite relevant to remember that you have to think about the calculations as well as emission factors to check and have this historization, and finally disclosing data in the correct metrics and according to the right standards. It's also very, very relevant, of course, from my perspective as an ESG analyst. But I also wanted, to highlight one more thing to our listeners, that sometimes for auditors, auditability starts even before the data entry. It starts with training the people who actually input the data into the system. So as an auditor, I often asked the person responsible for data quality to show me the instruction they give to the employees who enter the data. And many times I found out that there is a need of some kind of improvements because they have like incorrect units in instructions. Of course, there is a possible that our systems will catch it and will improve it, but actually it's also important to have well-aware employees that will also understand the process and understand this path of the auditability. We are going to the end, and I have one more questions before the Q&A session. If you had to give one piece of advice to anyone starting ESG reporting, so what would it be?
Auditability by design end-to-end for sure. But actually, if it is to be only one and only, being seriously, I would say that, guys, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Klaus on Mars for sure, because we are here to help, but actually to your finance department, because ESG really has ambition to be financial grade, because financial grade means credible, trustful. So simply, if you have any questions about business processes, data, systems, not to reinvent the wheel, to promote consistency, just reach out always first to your finance department so that they can tell you how they do handle that in finance and accounting, because always the best point of reference for any kind of stuff inside ESG. Whereas pretty seriously, one more thing also, even if you have once you have a best-in-class data and reporting ecosystem, everything goes smoothly, corrections, restatements, everything, just beautiful world where you don't need to spend an hour because everything is done almost automatically. Please keep in mind that probably one of the most important things, considering the purpose, which we discussed at the beginning, the efficiency which we want to achieve, is that you really should keep in mind that, of course, what you report to your senior leadership, your external stakeholders, investors is one piece, but actually to make the impact, like more positive impact or less negative impact, you really need to make your knowledge workers have access to your ESG data in a usable way. I'll give you an example from 3 years back when in one of the CPG manufacturers, we were workshopping with LCA experts, which is life cycle management experts who model footprints of materials, processes, etc., and the R&D research and development engineers who compose products and packaging. Yeah, and actually, what is the huge need is if I'm an R&D engineer, I'm using my tools, like I formulate my product, let's say shampoo, in a special dedicated tool. And I don't have time to go to your beautiful database or beautiful report or beautiful ESG statement to check some ESG related stuff. That's not my domain. I simply don't have time. So if you want me to help you to make an impact, you just need to bring your data, your ESG data, into my tools. So you need to build in your ESG metrics into my tool so that I can play with different components of my shampoo and see their, let's say, environmental footprint, for example, apart from costs and some specification characteristics. And you also need to bring it in a usable way. Don't bring me 100 metrics because I don't have time for going through 100 metrics across categories like global warming potential, one metric, water use, another metric, land use, another metric. What should I do with that? I have no idea. Bring me one combined, consolidated, R&D oriented, aligned with your strategy number. Let's say material environmental score, for example, so that I'm having the score in my tool. I just can take a look, compare two materials, and I'm seeing the cost, the environmental impact, and I can find the golden mean. And please trust me, guys, it's such an amazing adventure when you work with the guys, because then you realize that such an R&D engineer makes 2 clicks in their system. They replace one material with another, and the impact can be really huge. If you're working for a global, worldwide scale CPG manufacturer, changing a piece of a packaging goes into millions of metric tons of plastic, which has not been generated. So that's a really huge lever. Just bring your data to the knowledge workers, which can really make an impact, and it will all make sense. You will not be just reporting, but indeed you will be contributing, and it will be visible in your report. So that would be the final, let's say, thought which I would like to share. And now we are, let's say, more or less on time. So that's my point of view.
Yeah, that's really great ending, and I 100% agree with you that sometimes, you know, the accessibility of data is a really struggle for some people, and actually we then realize that there is a data, but we cannot get it to it, and it's really important to be aware where the data is, and to be also to make the accessible data for others, and also understandable data. All right, let's move on to the Q&A. I will now go into our chat. I don't see any questions, but feel free to ask it. We are really keen on to answer it. All right, I don't see any questions.
You can propose topics for the next ESG talks as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's also a good idea. So maybe only, you know, one question from the previous previous series. So what to do, Wiktor, when there is no data, or there is a lack of data in some cases? What, from the perspective of ESG data engineer, how to handle this problem of no data?
Well, we'll need to dive deeper into the details. What kind of data? I do assume that, okay, your base activity data like production volume or sales volumes, you have it. So there's no lack of that like data. You maybe miss some, let's say, let's take, for example, scope 3, category 1, purchase goods and services, emission factors. You don't have them because your suppliers do not provide them to you, don't have an LCA expert who could model that and bring them to you. Actually, then, honestly, very honestly, the easiest way is to buy the data. First, of course, you need to bring it, but you can buy. So apart from, depending on your organization, of course, long term, at the end of the day, usually big organizations really establish their data and reporting system on their own and outsource some of the services, but they manage everything. They build it made to measure. But if it's not the case for you, then please keep in mind that there are so many off-the-shelf software as a service platforms. I won't be saying names, but for one of our clients, by the way, for the last 2 or 3 months, we were running a request for information for scope 3 category 1 oriented data platform to support collection of data from suppliers and generally modeling of some secondary data if we are not having supplier data nor primary data. But simply the short answer is buy it. So buy a ready-to-go off-the-shelf platform where usually there's some ESG data is already built in and managed by the platform provider. So you need still to worry about that, but less. Yeah, so that's the simplest way. But simply you need to start measuring and getting data. If you ESG specific data, indeed it's buyable, it can be obtained outside, because, you know, ESG world is about modeling. Yeah, there's a saying from George Boggs that all models are wrong, but some are useful. ESG is some kind of modeling reality. Yeah? You do not install at every chimney in your plant a meter which measures greenhouse gas emission. You just take some emission factors applicable for your region, for your process, and you calculate. Yeah, so you model that. So simply you need the emission factors which are, let's say, available. You can either acquire it or buy it. But software as a service, off-the-shelf platform to support and familiarize with data collection. Yeah, I would say that's my recommendation if you really don't have data.
Yeah, actually, Victor, we have one question from Marco. Which tools do you use to collect and record sustainability data? It is the first question. Do you want to, should I read the next one?
Yes, please read to them.
Yeah. Have you already integrated TCFD framework in your architectures?
So I will take the first one first.
Yeah,
well, it depends. So in our cases, actually, since we really work with large enterprises, there's a mix of systems, actually. So usually, at the end of the day, there's a corporate ESG or ESG data platform where everything flows in. But actually, very often, also big enterprises use some external tools, like, for example, Scope 1 and 2 calculator, like there's a software as a service tool into which they input invoices for utility consumption, electricity, gas, fuels, water, waste, etc. They input stuff, and the greenhouse gas emission, water usage, etc. is being calculated there. That's a system of record, and later it flows to their data platform. And data platforms, they usually build using cloud computing services from either Microsoft, like Azure, or Google, or Amazon. But simply that's what is happening. So it's not a simple answer. Wojciech probably could also elaborate more on some kind of solutions which are available. But generally, there are three, let's say, approaches. Either you build your custom systems and data platform, or you buy off-the-shelf ones. Here are the two basic approaches. On TCFD framework in the data architecture, I'm not fully aware.
Yeah, I will take it also as well. So when it comes to the first question, we as Clouds on Mars, we often create our own tool for collect and record sustainability data, especially for client, and it is based on Power Apps or Power BI. It differs what actually client needs. We sometimes, and we had some cases for one of the client for home appliance. We implement Microsoft Sustainability Manager with also some kind of module for collecting and recording the sustainability data, but we are mostly focusing on actually connecting the data through some connectors with the systems that actually are in the company. And the next question: have you already integrated TCFD framework in your architectures? To be honest, with Clouds on Mars, we didn't. We had some other frameworks. It was ESRS, some GRI, and CDP. But I personally, with my previous company, I had also some experience with TCFD for one of the company, and we also integrated, but mainly focusing on ensuring the auditability. So it was some kind of TCFD audit on that framework. But really interesting questions. Thank you, Marco.
Wojciech, one more only point, because generally data architecture wise, it's less important. Of course, frameworks give you some particular requirements, but in terms of actual designing a data and reporting ecosystem, usually, auditability is pretty universal. So you do it in such a way, like you have revision management in system of records, then historization downstream. you can handle any reporting framework you want, because you have full control over your data. Everything is versioned. So if a framework says, okay, do not restate if something, then you do not restate, because you have all the versions. You can reproduce any state of data as of any point of time according to any framework. So that's the essence why it's good to do it from the very beginning, end to end, and by design. But it's pretty universal. Data architecture is pretty universal, and is, serves many frameworks, audit related or disclosure related. Yeah, that's my feeling also.
Yeah, great. I think that we are reaching to the end. If you had some other questions, don't hesitate to actually reach out to us on LinkedIn or via email. And really, thanks a lot for joining us today. I think it was really valuable to hear the perspective of an ESG data architect on how ESG data should be approached. And our next ESG Tech Talks session will take place in the new year. So follow us to hear some more information on the next topics. In the meantime, as I said, feel free to contact us if any additional questions or ESG related challenges appear in your organization. We are really happy to help. Victor, thank you. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Marco, for your questions. And have a great day, and bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Wojtek. Thank you very much, guys, and see you next time then. Bye-bye.
See you next time. Bye-bye.